Welcome to the Animal Law Podcast. This is Marianne Sullivan. Today we have something a little different for you. I'm going to be speaking with Abby Volin, who runs a consulting firm for landlords and others that advises on putting into effect pet-friendly policies, ones that actually work. And this is such an important topic for so many animals who every year lose their homes due to outdated no pet clauses that don't make any sense, that aren't fair to pets, that aren't fair to people. And it's also one of the most fraught legal issues involving companion animals these days because of the rights under federal law and some state and local laws of certain people who are living with disabilities, their rights to have animals in their homes. And do you know the difference between a service animal and an assistance animal and an emotional support animal and a pet and a companion animal? Like, what does it all mean, both to people and to animals? Well, if you don't know the difference between those things, don't feel bad, because neither does anybody else except for Abby. And she's going to be trying to share that information with us today. Before we get to the interview, I'd just like to quickly ask for your support in helping to keep our hen house, which produces this podcast, the Animal Law Podcast, along with the Our Hen House podcast going. And if you haven't been listening to the Our Hen House podcast along with this one, please try it out. If you can help out financially, please go to ourhenhouse.org/donate. We are a 501c3 charitable organization, and there you can join our special band of supporters whom we call the Flock, or you can make whatever donation you can afford and are comfortable with, and if you can, it would be so appreciated. And now to Abby Volin. Abby is the president of Opening Doors, which is a consulting firm, and it helps housing professionals manage pets on properties and counsels tenants with their pet-related housing issues. And she regularly shares her expertise by way of lectures for people on all sides of this issue, including landlords, attorneys, tenants, animal welfare organizations, and healthcare providers. I think you'll find this really interesting. Welcome to the Animal Law Podcast, Abby.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure. This is a subject that I actually address in my class with my students, and I'm always eager to find out more about it. And you seem to really be the expert. But let's start out with the problem rather than the solution. A lot of people listening may not have any kind of professional experience with this issue, and they also may not personally live in rental housing. And just explain to us, how are renters limited in being able to have pets, and how big is this problem?
It is a big problem. Housing-related reasons are one of the top, or housing-related problems are one of the top reasons that pets are surrendered to shelters, that pets have to be rehomed to other friends or families or neighbors. It is a big problem. More and more people have pets. The millennials in particular have a very high percentage of them have pets. They are renting longer, and pets are family. But the problem is that even though all these housing providers understand that you have to be pet friendly these days, they have not done anything about breed restrictions or size restrictions. And yet, the trend is, in pet keeping trends, shelter pets are the cool things to get these days. Everyone talks about adoption. Everyone wants that story, and they want to feel like they've saved their pet. And it goes both ways. Your pet saves you, you save your pet. Adoption is really the cool thing to do. There's been really wonderful marketing campaigns to make adopting the cool thing to do. But when it comes to shelter pets, especially dogs, a lot of them tend to be on that list of it's 12 to 15 breeds that are banned pretty much everywhere. And so people have all these dogs in particular that are banned in all these rentals. And so they just cannot find housing for themselves and their full family. It affects dogs. It also impacts, there's usually a limit on pets. A 2-pet limit is very, very common, or even a 1-pet limit. And these days, people have multiple pets in their household, particularly millennials. They are delaying having kids and instead are starting their families with pets. So they have multiple pets. People just cannot find housing for their entire family, which we know includes pets. And so people will do what they can and what they have to find housing.
So this is something I hadn't realized. The major problem looking at it, and, I look mostly at New York City, and I would say the major problem in leases in New York City are no pet clauses. But you're really talking about landlords who have thought about allowing pets, but have put these restrictions, either breed, number, or size, which are mostly affecting dogs. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's also regional. In New York City, certainly, it's going to be a lot of buildings that don't allow pets at all. Personally, I have 3 cats. And so when it came to finding a rental here in Washington, D.C., where everywhere is a 2-pet limit, it was very difficult for us to find a rental that would allow our entire family. And so, people are just trying to find ways to get housing because you don't have other options. People are not going to surrender their pets if they don't have to. And it's usually it usually also goes by socioeconomic status. People who don't have the resources to find creative ways to keep their family together, they are the ones who are, more likely going to have to surrender their pets.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, people in rental housing are less likely to be affluent. And yeah, it goes right. As with everything, the less money you have, the less power you have. And that can redound to your animals. All right. So let's get into a little bit starting on the law. I don't think the only legal issue here is service and assistance animals, and we'll certainly get to other legal issues. But I know this has become a huge issue, both because of the number of people who are covered by these laws, which is surprising to many people, and because the issue is starting to become somewhat notorious, and there's this sense that it's being abused. So let's just talk about the relevant laws relating to animals who are in the homes of people who are disabled. And I know the Americans with Disabilities Act is not the most relevant law here, but I think people have heard of that. So let's get that out of the way and start there. And tell us how the ADA applies to housing. What people and what animals does it apply to, and what does it require?
Sure. So for the Americans with Disabilities Act, so that is going to, there are 4 different titles. But for the most part, Title III is usually what is applicable, and that's actually not housing. That is for public spaces. So when you go to the mall or you go to the movie theater, it's anywhere where, the general public is allowed. And that's where you can take a service animal. And again, these are federal laws. So we're not talking about state laws, which, as we know, federal laws serve as a floor and not a ceiling. So states are more than welcome to enact laws that provide more protections for individuals living with disabilities, but not fewer. So the ADA, under Title III, it requires that you allow service animals in places of public accommodation. Now, that can include, for example, a leasing office in a rental building. That can include a conference room if the general public is allowed to go into that conference room, if they're invited in that conference room, or a party room in a building, or if a pool is open to the general public. So those are the cases where the ADA could apply to housing. There are also, the ADA can also apply to state and federal governments. So if you are in federal housing, then the ADA is going to apply as well. So under the ADA, it allows for service animals in places of public accommodation. And a service animal is a dog or a miniature horse that helps an individual living with a disability. And so an individual living with a disability, let's get a firm understanding of what that means, because disability has various definitions depending on what law you're talking about. And under the ADA, it is a very, very broad standard. It is a low hurdle to cross. You just have to have a physical or mental impairment that impacts an activity of daily living. That is it. The ADA they have listed a whole slew of different types of ailments that count as living with a disability, and they are not even exclusive. They talk about, physical disabilities that we commonly think of. Anyone who has trouble, they can't walk, they have trouble walking, or they have trouble, they need a wheelchair, or they're blind, or they're deaf. Those are what we commonly think of as living with a disability. But if you have cancer, and that means that you have trouble, going about your daily routine because you are in so much pain, or you're so nauseous that you're not able to go about your daily routine. Well, you're living with a disability. If you have anxiety and that does not enable you to go through your daily routine, or it impacts your ability to concentrate, you are living with a disability. It is a very, very low bar. And this is different from the definition of disability when it comes to, say, workers' comp law, or Social Security disability, where it is a much higher standard that you have to reach. And in fact, the new numbers that came out, according to the CDC, 1 in 4 people are living with a disability. And think about it. If you wear glasses, it's because your eyesight is a little bit off. That is a disability. And the aid that you are using to correct that disability are eyeglasses.
Is it one of the ones that apply to animals and that broadens this definition so much? Depression? Because so many people are living with depression. And I see that one of the disabilities that seems to come into play here a lot.
Yes, certainly psychiatric issues are included in that. But I wanted to make it known that there is a whole universe. If you have seizures, you're living with a disability. And it activities of daily living. It's getting up and getting to work in the morning. It's concentrating, eating, thinking, standing, sitting, walking. Anything that you need to get through to get through your normal day is an activity of daily living. So anything that impairs that hinders that is going to be a disability. The ways in which animals can help us can alleviate a symptom or effect of those disabilities. I think we're learning that it is just, it's countless the number of ways in which animals can help us. And again, unlike when you're dealing with, if you're dealing with a doctor and an insurance company is going to say, you need to prove that this treatment is absolutely necessary for us to cover it. Well, the word necessary is different when it comes to the ADA definition of disability. Necessary just means there's a connection. It just means that the aid that you're using, that it does something to alleviate that symptom or effect of the disability. It is, again, a very low standard. And that is why when you have 1 in 4 people living with a disability, which my hunch is a lot of that is going to be, depression, anxiety, ADD, things in that kind of realm. Yeah, you can see why the numbers are so high, and so many more people have pets, and pets do help us with those kinds of impairments.
What are the standards in the Act for how the animal has to help with the impairment? It's a little stricter than in other laws, isn't it?
No, it's not. So for the service animal, for the ADA. It just has to be a dog or a miniature horse. And miniature horse, the only reason one of the reasons people tend to like miniature horses is that they live longer. And so, you don't have to go through the training as often. And the service animal must be specifically trained to do a task that alleviates that the symptom or effect of the disability. So, you think of a guide dog that is trained to guide around someone who is blind. It can be a dog that is, they've been trained to detect a drop in blood sugar for someone with diabetes, or a dog who, for someone who's in a wheelchair, a dog who is trained to fetch items. Right. So you have that direct connection between the person with the disability and what that animal is trained to do. And there is a relationship because it alleviates a symptom or effect of that disability. And for verifying that disability, a property manager can only ask two questions. They can ask, do you have a disability? Are you living with a disability? And they cannot ask you what that disability is. It's a yes or no question. And what is your animal trained to do? And you do not have to have your animal demonstrate its task. So it's verbal assurances here. They're not, property managers still do have rights. If the animal is not behaving, if it's causing a nuisance or direct threat to the health and safety of others, the property manager can have the animal removed. They still need to find a way to provide the goods and services to the individual living with a disability, but they are not stuck with the animal in their store. All right, so that's the ADA. So it applies to public spaces, even those within housing.
And the other law I wanted to talk to you about is the Fair Housing Amendments Act, which my understanding was that it applies in housing, and it actually covers more than service animals. Am I right?
Yes. So the Fair Housing Amendments Act, that it uses the exact same definition of disability. So again, we have that very broad standard where, at this point, 1 in 4 people are living with a disability. And they call it's called assistance animals. And assistance animal, it's an animal that performs a task to aid an individual living with a disability or provides emotional support for an individual living with a disability. This is kind of one of my bugaboos here. So people have taken that to mean that so the first part of the definition, an animal that works or performs a task for an individual living with a disability, they take that to mean it is a service animal. And then they take the second part to mean it's an emotional support animal. And so they see it in those two categories, that it's one or the other. The regulations on the Federal Register actually say something different. So for assistance animals in the Fair Housing Act, they do not have to be trained to perform a task. It can be what the animal inherently does. And it can be any type of animal. It does not need to be a dog or a miniature horse. So, for example, an animal that can detect when someone's going to have a seizure imminently. Now, I happen to have epilepsy, and so I've looked into whether or not, getting an animal that would detect my seizures. And the more I looked into it, it turns out you can't really train an animal to detect a seizure. So anyone who tells you can, I would kind of question that a little bit. But there are animals that inherently, they kind of can sense it and they'll let you know. And so if you have one of those, it is not trained, it can be a cat that can detect whether or not a seizure is coming, just, because it's bonded with you and can detect those different changes going on in your body. That's an